Hello and welcome to section 10.3 of the book Transgender Ideology and Gender Dysphoria, A Catholic Response. The topic for this lecture is restoring the natural order, right? So we're doing the heuristic that I set forth. So the first step was listening with good counsel to medical authorities. And now this step is restoring the natural order. So this one is a bit more philosophical and less medical, as the last one was very medical. If you like the medical stuff, go back to 10.2, part 1 and part 2. We are now on 10.3. So we are in the judgment stage of the heuristic. So we have listened to counsel, and now we will make judgments. Again, I won't go into all the detail on judgments. I've covered it numerous times at this point, but it is not our job to judge our neighbor. Our role is to be friendly to our neighbor. That's the job within commutative justice. People on the same level, right? People on the same level, that's what we do, right? So a transgender barista at Starbucks does not need a lecture from you, right? That would be judging where you have no authority, which is a usurping of power, which is unjust, right? This is according to St. Thomas. However, we do sometimes need to make proper judgments when we have valid authority. So a parent has valid authority over their family, a teacher has valid authority over the classroom, a pastor has valid authority over the church, a politician has valid authority over civil society, right? A general has valid authority over the military. Right? There's many different ways in which one has authority and over certain jurisdictions. Right? The family, the military has authority over you in terms of military, whereas your husband or wife has authority over you in terms of your family. Right? So there's different ways in which people have authority, and we have to exercise our authority with good judgment, right? Otherwise, you have been entrusted with authority for no reason, right? And if you don't apply your authority correctly and take it seriously, somebody else who does not have proper authority will assume authority, right? This is where we are today, right? The church does not teach, gender theorists will, and that will be what will be taught to your children, right? This is either you will teach or somebody else will take your spot, right? We have to leave it to the proper authorities. So, kind of an old-fashioned idea, but a Thomistic idea. So a judgment at this stage is that a treatment should restore the natural order. It's also a little bit of a test back to medical professionals. Step 1, right? If your medical professional does not have the goal of restoring the natural order when they're dealing with the transgender issue, right? If they're addressing the transgender issue and it's not relevant to them what the natural order is and that it should be maintained or restored, then that's probably not the best doctor for you, right? The next step is the least invasive means, by the least invasive means. So that would be another judgment on your doctor as well. Does the doctor seem to restore the natural order by the least invasive means possible? Right? If the answer is no to those two questions, it's the wrong doctor. So this is step 2, but also is a reflection back on step 1, right? Because first step is good counsel, listen. But step 2 is proper judgment, right? So now we get to judge the counsel. So this is also consistent with male and female. He created them, and the Catechism, right? This is man and woman are created to, which is to say, willed by God. On one hand, in perfect equality as human persons. On the other, in which respect being a man and woman. Man and woman are both one and the same dignity, the image of God, right? So God says, I made man in my own image and likeness. He means man and woman, right? Man and woman combined, right, become the image of God incarnate. Equal dignity, different in incarnations, right? So when we're talking about restoring the natural order, one of these great examples, and this came from a book called Gender, written by an evangelical. They found the source, but I'm repeating the original source. So credits to the person who wrote Transgender. Very short book. He gave an example from John Wyatt, a doctor, who said, our role in Christian therapies, right, therapeutic approach, is more like an art restorer than the Legos advertisement. The only limitation is your own imagination, right? What does this mean, right? So when we try to perform therapeutics for people who are transgender, the goal is to be like a art restorer, right? There was a painting originally made, right? A masterpiece, priceless masterpiece. And over time it has gotten ripped, it's gotten dirty, somebody's painted over some spots, right? They adhered a new backing on it, right? I'm thinking back to the Baumhauer videos on YouTube of the art restorer, right? To do this, restoring is about removing the damage and returning it to the original image, right? The original masterpiece, right? And this is what transgender medicine should be about, right? Restoring the person back to their true image, right? This is the goal. It's not the Lego approach of limitation is your only imagination, right? Or the Burger King, have it your way. Right? This is not about the manipulation of the flesh, right? If you think to some people who've done all this plastic surgery, like a Michael Jackson, who is a very handsome black man. By the time he dies, he's somewhat of a scary figure, right? Or Donatella Versace, I think it is, right? Or there's so many, the Catwoman, or Ali London, the one that thought he was Korean, so he had his eyes pulled back to be Korean. Say, I'm a Korean, right? This is not, in the Christian sense, it is not about creating yourself. It's about restoring the original masterpiece from the creator, right? So if there is damage. The moral advice from Pius XII is an interesting one. So Pius XII, he writes about, I've mentioned things before with him on section 2, chapter 2, I think, in chapter 3 as well, I think, as well. When he's talking to a group of psychotherapists in 1953, Pius XII says, with still less reason can psychotherapy counsel a patient to commit material sin on the ground that it will be without subjective guilt. Such counsel would also be erroneous if this action were regarded as necessary for a patient's psychic easing, and thus part of the treatment. One may never counsel a conscious act which would be a deformation and not an image of the divine perfection, right? So what he's saying is, and he's talking to therapists, not plastic surgeons, but you cannot counsel in any way something which is sin. You can't counsel something, like a therapist should never say, well, you're married, but you should have an affair, right? That can never be the device, right? The advice. That is a deformation, not the image of perfection, right? So all advice that we give about the transgender issue now, it has to be consistent, right? We are aiming for psychic easing, right? Psychological easing. However, we can never give advice which is contrary to the divine perfection. Right? So this is important, right? Part 2 of this. Now, a few years later, he's talking to the International Society of Urology, and I got this from Father Nicanor Austriaco. He uses this example in one of his articles, and I returned to the original sources and used it myself, but Father Nicanor deserves some credit for finding this. He's talking to about the threefold criteria of totality for justifying a procedure. St. Pius says, the retention or function of a particular organ within the whole organism is causing severe damage or constitutes a threat to the totality of the person. So you can remove an organ, you can surgically remove something, change something, if it's a threat to the totality of the person, right? The whole person, right? So you have an arm and it has gangrene, right? Can you remove the arm? Yes, because if you don't remove the arm, the whole person will die, right? The totality of the person will be lost because of the sickness of the arm, right? So if a person has cancer in their kidney, you have to remove the kidney for the sake of the totality of the person, right? So that's one element. The damage or threat cannot be avoided and even notably diminished except by mutilation in question and whose efficacy is well assured, right? So there's no other way, right? You don't do it arbitrarily. You do it because it's absolutely needed, the arm is gangrenous. It's been diminished. It can't be saved, right? This is true. Okay, so one must reasonably expect a positive effect to compensate for the negative effect, right? So you have to believe, right, if you're removing the arm, you have to reasonably believe it's going to save the person's life or it'll have a positive effect. You just don't remove it if it's not going to produce any positive consequence, right? Let's say the person's dying of cancer and they're going to be dying the same day. Well, why would you remove the arm if it's actually going to have any consequence? So within this, there's no real wiggle room then for removing healthy organs, right? You have to be removing damaged organs, irreparable organs, and for the sake of maintaining the totality of the person, right? You have to reasonably expect that it will do some good. But how about, is there any time you can remove a healthy organ? And there was a case, and Pius XII commented on it, and he approved of it. And it was a person who had prostate cancer. So it's a man. He had prostate cancer. And the thing that would stop the prostate cancer from growing would be to slow the testosterone, right? So testosterone causes growth in prostate cancer. So I guess, we're dealing with the 1950s, so we're dealing with fairly primitive medical technology when it comes to cancers and things like that. We'd have a different treatment today, but at the time, the only thing they could do to slow the prostate cancer would be to remove the healthy testes of the man. So can you remove the healthy testes of the man? Essentially sterilizing him, right? Can we sterilize him when his testes are completely healthy, right? There's nothing wrong with them, but can we sterilize him? And Pope Pius XII says yes, because it's for the sake of the totality of the person, right? We're not just removing the testes for its own sake. We're doing it, what we're doing directly, right? The direct cause is the slowing down of prostate cancer. That's the direct cause. The indirect consequence, right, is the removal of the testes and the infertility, right? The purpose of this is not to produce infertility, but to save the person's life. If we don't do this, the whole person dies, right? They're not going to reproduce anyway. And their life will be notably diminished. They'll be dead. And if we remove the testes, there will be a positive effect, right? So when you look at it that way, there is the possibility here of removing healthy organs. So could this then be applied to the transgender issue, removing breasts from a woman who feels like a man, removing sex organs from a man that feels like they're a woman? Could this ever be applied? right? This is a tough one, right? This is not a straightforward, easy answer. You would tend to think probably not, right? But you can't automatically say, well, you can never remove healthy organs. Well, sometimes you can, right? For the sake of the totality of the person, sometimes you can. Maybe not in this case, but it's possible, right? Maybe the double, but people overuse double effect a lot too, right? It's like, well, if it's convenient, I use double effect, right? And then I didn't have a moral dilemma. Well, that's not a very effective way of using double effect. I think we've covered this already in earlier chapters, in chapter 2, for example. So if we take some of these principles of restoring the natural order, Dr. Bruggers, who I have already said in the past, I really like Dr. Christian Bruggers. I think he's very good, seminary director, married man, Catholic. He says, medical professionals are obligated to do what they could to ensure their participation would not contribute to culturally flawed attitudes about these important areas. So this is good, right? So he does say earlier, and I think this is just in the last video or the video before, perhaps if there's no other situation, right, this is a matter of life and death to this person, they have no quality of life. If they don't do this, and as long as we're all aware that all it is socially transitioning, it's not changing sex or gender in reality, then maybe there's room to do something like this, right? Maybe. But this is another part of it. But if you do transition sex, then it's important not for it to engage in gender theory. And Pope Francis has also pointed that out. Like, cannot engage in the gender theory aspect of this. One of the reasons why this book is focusing on gender dysphoria and gender ideology, right? The church outright rejects gender ideology. Gender dysphoria allows for the possibility of doing something, right? Maybe there's a possibility of restoring the natural order, perhaps, right? Maybe. Again, this quote from the Catechism was already used, right? Some of the other principles is that men and women are made in the image and likeness of God, and they have separate but equal dignities, right? Equal dignities. Ellie Palmer, a female to male, back to female, detransitioner, says that when she was in her mid-teens, she moved to male in her mid-teens and returned back to female by 19. She said, I would tell myself if I were to look back, I don't have to be a certain way to be a woman. You can dress however you want. You can wear makeup. You don't have to wear makeup. You don't have to change yourself. I think this is a very important principle. Now we're going to unfold this idea in the next couple of slides. So what's the principle of restoring? Why is, trying to make sense of this. In terms of the natural order, what's important? It's important here to talk about this idea that who you are sexually, which manifests itself psychologically through the idea of gender, is you. It's just you. Right. I think this line from Elle is very important. Ella, wearing makeup, don't wear makeup, wear a dress, don't wear a dress, long hair, short hair, whatever it is, it doesn't. Ultimately, this does not matter, right? You don't have to change yourself to fit into this model. Just be yourself, right? These things do not determine that you are male or female. Hopefully this section will unfold that a little more and kind of make sense, because if you're just looking at that slide, you might say, I don't know where this guy's going. So hopefully this will help you kind of redirect it, right? This idea of restoring the natural order makes you think, well, there must be a way in which women are women, and there must be a way in which men are men. Therefore, restoring the natural order is restoring men to men and women to women. And that looks a certain way, right? There's a certain aesthetic to it, right? A certain nominalism to it. But I think there's a good and healthy warning about this, and I think there's a lot of confusion about this, maybe from conservatives and liberals, and I think perhaps even liberals are more liberals tend to think that conservatives are more confused about it, but I think liberals might be more confused about it in reality. And it's dealing with kind essentialism, and this idea that to be a man or to be a woman, there's something essential in there. There's something in its ontology, something in its being that determines what you are, and it's unavoidable, right? It's you can't escape it, right? If you're a woman, you are a woman, and if you are a man, you are a man, right? Your essence is as a man, your essence is as a woman, and it determines who you are. So all women have women essences, right? All men have men essences. Now, second wave feminism is very much against this, and they use John Locke's philosophy, who's anti-kind essentialism, about this, right? The feminist view is there is nothing intrinsic about being a woman. There's nothing intrinsic about being a man, right? They are essentially the same with different bodies, and nothing unites all men together or all women together, right? There's nothing you could say, well, women are like, fill in the blank. No, that would be a kind essentialism. And the feminists from the second wave are very much against any of those types of statements. The reason why they're very against those types of statements is as soon as you start going down that road, what they fear is you'll start saying, well, to be a woman means you should be a wife. And to be a woman means you should be a mother. And to be a woman means you should stay at home and not work. And to be a woman means you are emotional and not good at math or science. And to be a woman, you can't be a leader or a president or something, right? Because as soon as you're saying that being a woman is different than being a man, you now have broken into a whole set of commands, right? And this is their perspective, that it opens up the door to commands. So the second wave feminists are very much against this type of kind essentialism. But there's a confusion, right? But if we say that there is no difference between men and women, it's just, there's nothing that unites men together. There's nothing that unites women together. It enters into this type of nominalism, which we talked about in chapter 2, that says, well, the only thing that unites women together is that all women say they are women, right? So if I say I am a woman, that makes me a woman too, equally as much as any other woman, because the only thing that unites women together is that women say they are women, right? So that's a nominalism. Or men say that they are men. That's the only thing that determines manhood is self-determination, right? Self-profession, right? There's nothing else, right? And fourth wave feminism is willing to run with that, and second wave feminism all of a sudden says, wait a second, that's not what we mean. But it kind of is what you mean, right? It kind of is, because once you throw out this idea that men and women are different, you open the door to, well, anyone can be a woman and anyone can be a man, right? This is what happens when you open the door on throwing out kind essentialism. Now we have to, as a Catholic approach, right, we can look at the middle ground, right? The Catholics often look at the middle ground with this, right? So what does it mean to be a man, essentially, or a woman, essentially, right? Well, it doesn't mean all men are Marlboro men and all women are Barbie dolls. That's not what it means, right? This is what the stereotype might be, right? This might be what the culture says masculinity or femininity is, or what manhood is or womanhood is. But this is not what the church says manhood and womanhood is, right? We talk about two people made in the image of God in equal dignities and respect, but different, right? And we don't define what the difference is, other than there is a difference, right, between men and women. So we're not saying Barbie dolls and Marlboro men, right? Some conservative evangelicals kind of push that route, like girls are going to cook and men are going to hunt, right? We're going to have the sexes retreat and we're going to do two different roles. Well, this is Marlboro Men and Barbie dolls. This can be a bit of a problem. Father Benedict Ashley, wonderful Dominican, he points out even masculinity and femininity turns out to be largely cultural rather than genetic. Right? So I think it's a very fair statement. Right? How much of this Marlboro Men and Barbie dolls is innate, our true nature, right? In our essence, and how much of this is cultural? Right? We don't need to accept any of the cultural part. Right? Cultures evolve and change, but as a Catholic, we're saying there is something though innate, and it's going to have to do with reproduction, right? Because why do you have male and female? Well, because the two become one, and they become one flesh, and this happens very literally in the creation of children, right? The two become one. It's not it's a sexual nature to this dichotomy, right? It's for procreation. Now, Kate Bornstein, a gender theorist, transgender activist, she points out, I have no idea what a woman feels like. I never did feel like a girl or a woman. Rather, it was my unshakable conviction that I was not a boy or a man. It was the absence of a feeling rather than the presence that conceived me into changing my gender. Right? So she's went from male to female, and yet still points out, I have no idea what it feels like to be a woman or a girl, and I just feel like I'm not a man. Frankly, she sounds confused, right? Because what does it feel like to be a man? What does it feel like to be a woman? How would anyone know, right? This is Edith Stein's issue with empathy, right? To say I feel like somebody else, right? I know, like I feel like a dog. Well, how would I know how a dog feels in order to know if how I feel is the same as how the dog feels, right? All I really know is my own experience, right? I only know my own reality. I don't know anything else, right? I can't say I feel like I'm Chinese. Well, I don't know what it feels like to be Chinese, so I don't know how I can make the connection. The most you can do is say, I think I feel like a Chinese person would feel. Right? I think I would feel like how a woman would feel. You don't know how a woman would feel. Right? It's a good chance how a woman feels and how a man feels is very similar. Right? Although there is a dichotomy within our human species, it's a very slight dichotomy, so it might be difficult. Right? I know women who are more masculine than me, right? And I know men who are more feminine than women, right? So to say you know how it feels, there's a wide range in what masculinity and femininity within the sexes. So it's hard to know what that means, right? Most you get is I think I feel, right? Dr. Laura Erickson-Stroth and Laura Jacobs, again, transgender activists, they say that some people come to their trans identities out of an outgoing exploration of gender, and that their understanding of themselves has been influenced by the culture and gender norms. Again, these are transgender activists, but what they're making the claim, both Laura Erickson-Schlott, Laura Jacobs, Kate Bornstein, Rachel Ann Williams, Breen Tannerhill, they all seem to be saying the same thing. Gender is creative, it's expressive, you can change it, you can adapt it, you can experiment with it, you can be this today and something else tomorrow. All of this is talking about gender expression. It's all dealing with stereotypes of what it means to be a man and a woman. Has very little to do with actually being a man or a woman. Right? There's nothing to do, right? Perhaps there's not that much that defines what a woman is that's different than what a man is. But whatever that essence is that defines a woman differently than a man, I don't think they're grabbing it, right? Because it has something to do with procreation. So adding silicone breasts does nothing to your womanhood, right? Growing a beard when you're born a female does nothing to do with your actual manhood, right? And from the Aristotelian perspective, what is manhood? Is being able to procreate in another. What is womanhood? Being able to procreate within oneself, right? Is anything that any of these people doing having anything to do with the essence of womanhood or manhood? None of them are reproducing, so none of it is none of it's dealing with real womanhood or manhood, right? We're dealing with secondary characteristics, gender stereotypes, and gender expression, none of which have anything to do with the essential nature of one's sex. That's it in a nutshell. Took me a long time to get there, but that's it. We also can look at common sense, as St. Thomas talks about it. Right? If we want to see, well, what is somebody? This is a question of quiddity, right? And we'll get to this again. Or we'll get to it now. Just do it now. The quiddity question, right? What is something, right? And we use the common sense to know what things are, right? This is the faculty of the soul which organizes our sense impressions so that they are unified into an object. Unified object is formed, and everything is received by the senses is called common sense, right? So when I see a man, I can say that's a man, right? Or I see a woman, I can say that's a woman. Well, how do I know this, right? Is it the breast? Is it the beard? Is it the bone structure of the face? Is it the width of the shoulders, right? It's very hard to tell, right? If there's a beard, maybe you say, oh, that's a man. But there's a lot of things you just don't know, right? There's men who have long hair. There's women who have little mustaches, right? But there's something about the common sense which kind of picks up all of these secondary characteristics, and they kind of put them together in a single form that we can say that's a man, that's a woman. Even when somebody is often trans, you can say, well, that's a trans man or a trans woman, right? Not always, but quite often you can say, you can tell that the person was born something else from the culmination of secondary characteristics, right? So these help us to define what something is, right? Another way of looking at it is action follows being, right? So if something looks like a duck, it swims like a duck, it quacks like a duck, is probably a duck, right? So action follows being, and being follows action. So ducks act like ducks, and a duck, and it's a duck based on the way it's acting, right? If you look at a dog and cat, biologically very similar, right? 4 legs, fur, tail, ears, right? Cats and dogs are pretty similar, right? But cats are notably different than dogs, right? Even very small dogs act like dogs, and even big cats act like cats. So there's a difference in their being, right? So why does a cat meow, and why does a dog bark? Because of their dogness, because of their catness, right? There is a natural sense about them, a natural essence about them, which determine what they are. And even when things are broken, even when there is a brokenness within this, there's still a common sense about it, right? So this will be brought up a lot. You say, well, if it's returning to the natural order, what do you do with men who can't get people pregnant, or a woman who's infertile, right? What do you do then, right? If it's all about natural reproduction and these people can't reproduce, therefore they don't, they don't count, right? They don't count in the system. No, we look at these common senses, right? The common senses, just like a fire truck that has a broken axle, can't drive. We can still look at it and say, well, that's a fire truck. Well, why is it a fire truck? Well, its length, its color, its shape, it has a ladder on it, has hoses on it. It looks like other fire trucks, right? It could be a broken fire truck, but it is still quite obviously a fire truck, right? So you don't have to say, you don't have to know all of the specifics. Just through the common senses, we're able to tell these things. So if a person is a female, but they can't get pregnant, you could say, well, but the facial structure, the way the body is shaped, if we go deeper, the bone density, the size of the heart, different aspects of the brain internally, the wider hips, right? All of these different features, right? Hundreds of features, thousands of features, kind of in combination determine the common sense of what a person is. And even if it's, maybe you get it wrong, right? In the section on intersex in chapter 4, there are very strange cases, right, where a person is XX chromosomes, but they have male features, or vice versa, because the phenotype is different than the genotype, right? So there are abnormal situations. However, the phenotype is generally the phenotype, right? So if the person looks like a male, there's a good chance they are a male, right? We can make this very complicated. People who are gender theorists try to make this very complicated. Sex and gender, it's all a spectrum. Not really. I can look at somebody and I generally get a sense about who they are, right? Because of the common sense, right? They're kind of asking us to throw out the idea of the common sense. You never know what somebody is, right? You can look at a person and say, well, that's a woman. And they say, well, you might see a woman, but I'm really a man, right? You're asking me to ignore common sense, right? The common senses. Causality is also a big part with restoring the natural order. The modernist would look at just the material cause of the person, saying, well, what are their organs, right? That's all that matters, right? Or what is their flesh, right? And you can replace your chest with boobs with just some silicone, or you can change your facial structure with just some hormones, right? We can change things because it's all material, right? It's just material. Right? This is the modern approach. But from our classical approach, our Thomistic approach, Aristotelian approach, we're going to look at the efficient cause, the material cause, formal cause, final cause. Right? So the efficient cause is who has caused this to be, who has created it. So in some ways your parents, but in other ways you were made by a creator. Right? That changes a lot. When you're looking in the mirror and you just see raw material, you're going to approach the world differently than if you look in the mirror and you see the created, right? The beloved. Very different. Very different. And that life is a gift, right? But in some ways also on loan, right? Because it's this exitus reditus, right? You're sent out to return, right? So there's this other dimension of this, right? But this is all stemming from the efficient cause, who is God, right? There is the material cause, which is our body, which is, if I say I'm a male, it's because physically I'm a male, right? If I say I'm a female, it's because physically I'm a female, right? This is the material cause. Now we also have the formal cause, which is one's shape, one's archetype, one's essence, right? A fulfillment of one's essence. So if you are a male, you will develop as a male. If you are a female, you will develop as a female, right? It's we're made in the image of maleness and femaleness. It is a necessary thing. Sex is we are not essentially male and female, but we are essentially sexed, right? It's a necessary accident that we must all be male or female, right? Because if human beings are not by essence male or female, male and female, right? Because not all humans are male and not all humans are female, so it's not the essence, but that human beings are sexed is essence, right? Because all human beings have a sex, but it's a necessary accident that we will have a sex, right? So that's part of our form of who we are. And finally, our teleos, right? That we are made in the image and likeness of God, right? That we live in this life for the sake of something, right? For part of a theodrama, part of our final journey, right? Our journey home, hermeneutic, but our journey home is our approach, right? And it's to return to God, right? He's given us this life, and we return to God. So there's a purpose behind what we're doing. It's not just experiment and make it up, and this body is for our own enjoyment. And if I want to be a cat, I'll make myself look like a cat or a snake or whatever it is. That it exists within a teleology, a cause, right? An efficient cause, a formal cause. And lastly, in this section, and I realize it is a bit of a scattered section with this idea of returning to the natural order. I didn't want to get into all the philosophy again, because we got into the philosophy in chapter 2, and it was a very long section, so I don't want to repeat the whole thing. So when you want to look at some of this, go back to chapter 2 if it's helpful. Part of it too now is returning to the natural order, is that we're talking about the beautiful, right? Perhaps a transcendental, right? One of the arguments is that beauty a transcendental, according to St. Thomas. At least secondarily, it's a transcendental, right? So what goes into being beautiful, right? Beauty and goodness go hand in hand, right? So you are made good, right? Very good, right? We're made in the image of goodness, which means we are made to be beautiful. Well, within beauty, we're going to see integratias, right? Constantia and claritas, right? So what does this mean? It means that to be integrated, right? That our sex and gender are integrated together, right? That we are heliomorphic, body and soul in unity, right? There is a unity in our personhood. It's not, well, I am a male mind and a female body, and tomorrow I'm agender and gender fluid and right? This is disintegrated, right? Disintegrated ontology. We're talking about an integrated ontology, right? A simplicity in our integration, right? I am simply a man, right? Not special, not unique. I am just a man, right? This is an integratedness, right? Constantia is dealing with balance, proportion, harmony, right? So this is not being a woman with boobs and a beard and big hairy chest and a beard and women's clothing and a man's haircut, right? This I know people trying to be very creative and individuals. I'm a unique individual. I know we're all unique. But there should be a balanced harmony, proportion, a sense of modesty and virtue built into who we are, right? We should be both physically and emotionally and psychologically balanced. Very important in terms of being a beautiful being. And lastly, claritas, right? The absolute simplicity, like you drop a pebble through clear water and you can see it go all the way to the bottom, right? It's just simple, transparent, no deception, no confusion. It's not foggy, right? Think about this psychologically, these types of images, right? Completely transparent. What you see is what you get, right? Not deceptive at all. Honest. Integrity, right? Integrated, balanced, right? These all add to our beauty, right? Which is integrated into our goodness, right? It's both goodness and beauty are the same except in form. St. Thomas says. So this is our final goal. So when a surgeon or a medical professional is looking to restore the natural order, they should be looking to restore beauty, right? Right, psychologically and physically, right? Integrated together. A healing of the totality of the human person, right? We see it right here within these three characteristics of beauty. So this is our goal, right? If anybody is not looking to do this, they're looking to be creative and unique and exploratory. That's lovely, but that's not Catholic, right? We're just looking for simple beauty, right? Modesty. If you want to change yourself in some way, that's wonderful. Become more virtuous, right? Be good, right? You won't get tired of it, right? That's the goal. Okay, so that's it for this topic. The next one is also going to be very short, so thankfully, and that is the least invasive means. So hopefully you enjoyed this. Thank you very much for joining me tonight.